Today we are ranking every edge rusher in the 2025 draft class. I think edge and running back are probably the two strongest position groups this year. Compared to last season, I had 10 edge rushers with day 1 or day 2 grades. This year I have 16, so there's a lot more depth in the second and third round specifically. If you're new to the channel, I'm going to have 3 graphics for every player that I talk about. I've got a scouting report with strengths and weaknesses, their athletic testing and measurables, and then skill ratings. And I usually start these videos by going through what all of the skill ratings actually mean. So for pass rushing, the first rating is hand usage. And this is my first year doing these skill ratings for each player. So there's definitely some changes I want to make going forward, but hand usage is a little bit too broad and all encompassing. I want to split it up into a few different ratings in the future. For now, it's essentially just your overall pass rushing technique. So accuracy, strike power, timing. Next up, we've got moveset, which is kind of an overrated aspect of rushing the passer in my opinion, and it doesn't have a very high weighting in the overall pass rushing score. This isn't purely just how many moves you have. In reality, like, you really only need 2-3 moves if you include bull rush, but I have this as a rating to separate players with really mature and advanced pass rushing approaches from players that just have like one move, and it is kind of a limiting factor for their success. And it also isn't purely a volume thing. The way that moves string together and build off of one another is, I think, a lot more important than just the number of moves that you have in your bag. Counter is basically your second wind as a pass rusher, and how you're able to sustain what I call a secondary rush effort. So it's like when your first move gets tied up, is the rep just over, or are you able to quickly break contact, transition to another move? It also factors in like reading your opponent and responding accordingly. So if you're maybe initially going with an outside cross chop, but they open up their hips, you see an opening for an inside counter, you switch to that kind of smoothly, fluidly. All of that stuff is encapsulated with the counter rating. Explosiveness is basically just your burst off the line of scrimmage. Bend is your hip and ankle flexibility to be able to round the corner at tight angles. Quickness is lateral quickness. How fast can you get from a blocker's outside shoulder to their inside shoulder and cross their face? Power is just your power rushing ability, bull rush, long arm. It isn't necessarily how powerful you are as a player, it's how effective your power rush is. So there's a lot of really strong players in this class that don't win with power that frequently because their technique is off. And then pursuit is motor, closing speed, tackling ability, your flexibility and balance to break down in the backfield and mirror the quarterback if he changes directions quickly. For run defense, we've got block shedding, which is self-explanatory. Block avoidance includes like shooting gaps and getting around the block without engaging with it head on. Play recognition is another broad category that takes into account how quickly you read the play, how quickly you read blocks, and then also your discipline and gap integrity. And then the final 2 ratings are tackling and anchor, which I think both speak for themselves. All right, onto the rankings. I've got 36 players graded, and we're gonna start with Baylor edge rusher Garmon Randolph. Watching the Shrine Bowl film, wrote him down as somebody that looked athletic on the field, had a couple flashes, but his tape was pretty underwhelming. Doesn't really know what he's doing on the field. Only had 15 pressures all of last season. He's a decent at best run defender. His athletic traits are kind of interesting. I mean, 96th percentile 10-yard split at his size definitely catches your attention, but such a raw player, and he'll be 24 and a half years old when he gets drafted. I wouldn't draft him, but would definitely give him a shot as a UDFA. Next up is Chaz Chambliss out of Georgia. Actually really liked his college tape as a run defender, but he's extremely undersized, 6'2", 245 pounds, 3rd percentile arm length. So it's hard to really project him as an early down player in the NFL. And then he just gives you really nothing as a pass rusher. I have him with the lowest pass rush rating in this class, and he kind of broke the scale. I had to adjust it to fit him in. Can't win with power or push the pocket at all. Doesn't have the burst as a high side rusher. His path towards sticking in the NFL is basically as a special teams player and like the last edge defender on an active roster. At 34, I've got Colorado's BJ Green, who I really enjoyed watching his tape. He's an undersized edge defender with a really high motor. He's pretty explosive. He's got a really effective cross chop, and he's actually had a lot of production over the last couple years. 99 pressures and 14 sacks since 2023, but he has short arms, really tight hips, can't bend the corner that effectively for a speed rusher, and I thought his bull rush was just average. He does barely have a draftable grade, but I think the upside with him is pretty limited. Next up, we've got Ethan Downs out of Oklahoma. A unique build, 6'4", 270 pounds, but sub 32-inch arms, and then 94th percentile hand size. Not super explosive as like an edge bender, but he's really explosive into contact and plays with good leverage when he uses speed to power, so he generates displacement pretty consistently. Better than I expected playing blocks in the run game, but with his lack of length, I think it'll be a challenge in the NFL, and then just doesn't give you much as a high side rusher because he's so tight, changing directions and trying to turn the corner. Next up, we've got Ahmed Hassanein out of Boise State. A really productive player last year with 62 pressures and 10 sacks. He is a densely built power rusher with a very one-dimensional pass rushing approach. He's really just going to push the pocket, doesn't have the skill set or athletic traits to win as a speed rusher. He is pretty natural when it comes to transitioning to counters at the top of the rush and kind of finding an entry point into the pocket. So he's got decently high ratings for power and counters, but really doesn't give you a whole lot outside of that. And, his bull rush, like I would describe as effective, but not necessarily dominant. At 31, I've got Jah Joyner, who is one of several players in this class that I thought was really impressive in 2023 and then had a disappointing final year. He has a prototypical build with very long arms, 4 forced fumbles over the past 2 seasons, and his length really comes in handy at the top of the rush where he can get those drive-by strip sacks as he's kind of getting flushed around the corner. Doesn't have great bend to sink and get underneath the edge, but he can still kind of make plays as he's grazing the outskirts of the pocket. He has a pretty diverse move set, cross chop, ghost rip, stab chop, and some inside counters. Also used inside spins a lot more often in 2023. I just thought his first step was so much more sluggish this year and just really did not threaten the corner at all, even against Big Ten tackles. And if you watch his tape from both years, it's not like he put on significant weight, at least based on the eye test. But the drop-off is just impossible to miss, and I think it speaks to the decline in production. He has the kind of build that you would think would translate to being a really good power rusher, but just doesn't have an accurate punch, hand pop, leg drive, or pad level to generate any displacement. And then his anchor and consistency defending the run was also disappointing, although it did improve noticeably from 2023 to 2024. So Joyner's a player that you could be getting some value in if you buy low and put a lot more faith in the 2023 season. I've kind of just developed a policy where I put by far the most stock into the final year's tape. If there's one like consistent thread of me missing on prospects, it's being too open-minded and like putting faith in their penultimate year's tape and saying like, oh, this is the real A.T. Perry, this is the real Will Levis. Like it's not worth it. And we'll see some other players pop up higher up in the rankings that have a similar thing going on. At 30, I've got Miami edge rusher Tyler Barryn, a very experienced player, over 2,000 career snaps. He's a smooth athlete, I would say, with decent power, decent bend, but just lacking the quick twitch and explosiveness to win as a speed rusher in the NFL. Has good size from a measurement perspective, but really narrow base, and I think poor awareness when it comes to reading blocks. Like, he gets cut off on the backside so often. I think he's kind of just a capable college player that doesn't really have a trump card trait when projecting to the NFL. Now, I haven't done tiers for the other videos I've done up to this point, but just the way I kind of graded the edge class, they really fell pretty cleanly into tiers. So I'm going to put a line in between the rankings to kind of delineate that. At this point, we are now onto players where their upside at least interests me. Like, I could see a realistic path towards them being a rotational player at the minimum. And so that's going to start with Antwaun Powell-Ryland out of Virginia Tech. The production is undeniable. I mean, 25.5 sacks since 2023 is the most among all FBS defenders, has 7 forced fumbles over the last 3 seasons. He's a decent athlete with some skills as a pass rusher, but the 31.5-inch arms, I think, are a major roadblock for him. And I don't think his skill and technique is really enough to offset that. So he wins primarily with a speed rip, dip and rip, whatever you want to call it. Kind of just no nonsense acceleration upfield, flattened to the quarterback. He isn't like an elite straight line athlete, but he's really urgent out of his stance. Takes some long strides upfield, and I think does a good job of building or at least maintaining his speed around the arc. And that allows him to get to the quarterback, before he's gone through his progressions and gotten the ball out. He has a very high finish rate over the last 2 seasons in terms of pressure to sack conversion, but also the strip sacks. And, sometimes that can be fluky, but with Powell-Ryland, I think it does speak to just his efficiency, getting from point A to point B. He also has what I would describe as a formidable bull rush, not dominant, but effective, definitely. But overall, I thought his moveset was pretty limited and predictable. Doesn't really have the length where I would project him being able to win with his hands that effectively. He does technically have a spin move, but it's one of the worst spin moves in this class. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen someone cover less ground with their spin move. I mean, just pretty much ends up exactly where it started. There were like a couple wins, but it far outweighed by the number of inside spin attempts that just go nowhere. And then I just don't see him being a good run defender in the NFL. I think he's really smart in the run game, but stays attached to blocks, doesn't have the length to stay clean as an edge setter, and kind of just gets engulfed at the point of attack. At 28, I've got Fadil Diggs out of Syracuse. Really interesting player. So I've said this before, but I usually watch games in reverse chronological order. I just, start from week 14, work my way backwards. And then I also watched some of his 2023 tape at Texas A&M. And I think he had the 3 best games of his career, or at least the last 2 seasons, in the last 3 games of this past year, like weeks 12, 13, and 14. He looked like a potential 4th round pick maybe. But the more and more tape I watched, the more concerns I ended up having. So he has good size and length. I would say he's a well-rounded, above-average athlete. As a pass rusher, he uses a really wide range of moves, but there is an extremely clear distinction between what he's good at and what he isn't. So his speed to power, I thought, was awesome. Really checks every box, from the start of the rep to the finish, as far as what you want to see. Initiates contact with authority, upward strikes to create leverage points, and then low pads, good leg drive to stick the landing and get into the pocket. I think his inside counters are really effective. Does a good job of using stutters and hesitations to expand the B gap and create space. Over the second half of the year especially, he started to use a spin a lot more often. And then as a high side rusher, he's able to win with a speed rip. Doesn't have the best acceleration around the arc, but does a really good job of bending through contact. That's a big thing for edge rushers. Like, you might look great running the hoop drill, but if a tackle's got his hands on you, that bend doesn't always translate. And then he kind of uses that hook with the inside hand to propel him around the corner. But his hand usage overall, I think, has a long way to go. And he really struggles to win with his hands as a face-up rusher. His strikes are sloppy, imprecise, poorly timed. He also just doesn't pack enough heat with his punch to break contact if the blocker gets his hands on him, or just, swat down the hands and clear a path around the edge. So you see that when he uses a cross chop, and especially a stab chop, which is one of his most frequently used moves. There's so many stalemates at the top of the rush because that outside hand chop is just so flimsy, it doesn't knock down the tackle's hands. But then it also shows up when he gets tied up initially with like a jump set. He doesn't have the strike power to break contact and, get into a counter move. He's pretty forceful when it comes to setting an edge and locking out an ISO block, but overall, I thought that his run defense tape just as a whole was pretty disappointing. Doesn't do a good job of anticipating blocks, and he'll get caught by surprise and bounce out of a gap. Next up, I've got Elijah Ponder out of Cal Poly. Caught my attention with his pro day. I watched his tape, and he's far from a sure thing, but I think there's something here with him. So starting with the testing, he's about 6'3", 251 pounds, just over 33-inch arms. He's definitely undersized, but this isn't like a size outlier or anything. He had a 94th percentile 10-yard split, and then his vertical and broad jumps were 98th percentile, and both of those were the best in this entire edge class. But then he also had a 6.99 3-cone, 84th percentile, and a 4.28 shuttle. This is a top-tier, well-rounded athlete with first step explosiveness, lateral quickness, closing burst, chase down speed, and bend. I think the physical traits are really special. I don't know if he looks like a 99th percentile athlete on tape, but definitely somebody that is worth betting on mid to late day 3. So all of those movement skills translate to the tape, and they translate as a pass rusher. He has the first step explosiveness to win as a speed rusher, but also convert speed to power. He threatens a two-way go at all times because of how quickly he can cross the blocker's face, and he really forces his opponents to defend both edges throughout the entire rep. He's able to fire off the line of scrimmage with a straight line rush path and then quickly deviate on a dime, shoot into an open gap. He has a wide variety of moves and really quick and violent hands to slice through soft punches, but he definitely needs to get more precise with his hands and refine his hand placement, salesmanship, and like setting up moves, and then also his timing to really reach his potential as a speed rusher. There's still too many plays where he's missing his swipe or his chop. He just doesn't win with his hands at a high enough rate right now. I think there's definitely potential as a power rusher, but he's overly dependent on winning with first contact. Like, he needs to fire into the block, create early knockback, and soften his opponent's anchor if he's going to win with power. He doesn't have the play strength and the leg drive to sustain his bull rush and displace the pocket slowly. Like, he's not going to be a pocket pusher. The level of competition is not good, and that's a key part of his evaluation. Only played one FBS team over the last 2 seasons, and it was Stanford, which is kind of like halfway between an FBS team and an FCS team in terms of offensive line play, at least. But I don't know, man. There aren't a lot of athletes at this position that are going to be available on day 3, and it's not like he's a complete project from a technique standpoint. Speaking of explosive athletes, my edge 26 is Collin Oliver out of Oklahoma State. So this is kind of a unique situation because he played off-ball linebacker for most of his career. In 2023, he started to split time between linebacker and edge, and then for the 2024 season, he was going to fully make that transition and switch to being a full-time edge. But he only played 6 quarters in 2024, and 4 of those were against South Dakota State. Played South Dakota State week 1, got injured halfway through the Arkansas game in week 2, and then missed the entire rest of the season. So we have to heavily rely on 2023 tape where he's splitting time between 2 different positions. So when I watched Collin Oliver's tape, I gradually came to the conclusion that he is not an NFL edge rusher. I still took the time to watch him, so I'm including him for this video, but I think he might kind of be stuck between 2 positions. In terms of his athletic profile, he has elite speed and explosiveness, 90th percentile or better in the 10-yard split, 40-yard dash, and vertical jump. He just screams off the edge, doesn't lose any steam as he rounds the corner. He's got the quickness, bend. If he was a more complete player, like, we're looking at a special athlete for an NFL edge rusher. The problem is that he is such a size outlier, 240 pounds, first percentile arm length, and he has a complete inability to play through contact. There is absolutely no power rush. I have him rated as the 2nd worst power rusher in this class. And I mean, there are plenty of undersized pass rushers that are still able to convert speed to power. But when he uses a bull rush, it's like a bird flying into the kitchen window. Across all of his tape from the last 2 seasons, if I had to estimate, I would say he tried to win with power like 40 times. And I think he had 1.5 wins. He just doesn't connect to the block with firm or accurate hands, and it completely ruins his speed to power conversion. But I'd be able to excuse that if it was just that he couldn't win with power. his issues playing through contact, I think, are a lot more extensive than that. It really comes into play with everything that he does. Like, if he gets touched, he's not winning the rep. He needs a wide open runway to just win a foot race to the quarterback. If he has to absorb contact, defeat the blocker's hands, fight through traffic, it's kind of just an insurmountable roadblock. He can't win as a face-up rusher because if he gets into the blocker's strike zone, they just clamp him up and then he doesn't have any recourse to free himself. He has really good bend, but if the blocker recovers and makes contact with him as he's turning the corner, he loses his footing all the time. Even like on a stunt, trying to slice through a gap, just a slight nudge will completely, send him flying off of his feet. And then as a run defender, I mean, I don't think he stands a chance setting the edge. At 25, I've got Quay Robinson out of Alabama. A unique player because he's a fifth-year senior, but really didn't see the field until 2024 and only has 370 career snaps. If he was younger, I'd be a lot more intrigued with him as a prospect because there are some pretty incredible flashes on tape, but his skill set overall is very unrefined. And for a 24-year-old player coming out of a program like Alabama, he still has an incredibly slender build. And I think he's kind of like maxed out physically. I don't see him really getting much bigger. But with that being said, he's a special teams ace. And his best plays as a pass rusher from this past season are pretty eyebrow raising. So kind of similar to Jalon Walker, Robinson was a hybrid edge off-ball linebacker, split time between those two positions. I think he definitely projects as an edge rusher in the NFL, but I will say I thought his off-ball linebacker tape was more impressive than Jalon Walker's. He had an injury later in the season, so we didn't get any testing for him, but 6'4", 243 pounds, arm length is pretty solid, and I think for the most part, he's a really good athlete. The pursuit speed, burst, and lateral quickness, I think, are really good, but he isn't as flexible bending the edge as you would expect for an undersized player. Even though he has the athleticism to win as a high side rusher, he is just lacking the skill and precision with his hands. Doesn't even really have a move set to defeat the outside hand, but there's really just no nuance or subtlety as a speed rusher. He has good lateral quickness to cross the tackle's face, slice into the B gap, had a couple nice wins against Will Campbell, which, who didn't this year? But that's a different conversation. The most surprising thing about Quay Robinson's tape, though, were the flashes of dominance as a power rusher. There are some reps, a couple plays in the South Carolina game specifically, where he just showed a devastating long arm stab. The first play against South Carolina, he wrecked their right tackle. I don't know if he got injured or benched, but later in the game, they had another guy in there, and Quay Robinson launched him into orbit. It's hard to find a long arm, especially from a player of his size, that literally lifts the tackle off of the ground the way that this play did. But he's another player, like I was talking about with Elijah Ponder, where he needs to land a decisive initial strike to win with power. He doesn't have the sustainable leg drive to just push the pocket consistently, so a lot of his speed to power reps stall out. There's quite a split with Quay Robinson in some of the rankings. Like PFF has him 119, Mike Renner has him 88, Mel Kiper's got a pretty high grade on him. I totally see what other people see in him. It's just a player where I think a lot of things need to go right for him to really pan out. At 24, I've got Barryn Sorrell out of Texas. I expect him to go pretty early in the draft, a lot earlier than I have him ranked. He's a player that a lot of people really seem to like. He's 80 to 120 on a lot of people's boards. I really tried to see it with him, and he's a solid player. I just kind of think he's a jack of all trades, master of none type. He's 6'3", 256, sawed-off frame, tested pretty well at the combine. His best drill was the 3-cone, which I think definitely shows up on tape. I don't think his first step quickness or pursuit speed really stands out, but is really flexible in his lower half to flip the corner and take tight angles to the quarterback. I think he's really good at reacting to what the blocker gives him. he's going to get a lot more wins reactively as opposed to proactively, if that makes sense. So you see the instinctive hand-to-hand combat skills to react to a quick punch. If he gets a jump set, he can quickly give a one-hand swipe or, grab the wrists with a forklift technique and just neutralize a quick punch and then get upfield. He has a violent, powerful outside hand chop. When he gets tied up, he delivers just a booming strike to the tackle's hands and breaks their grip. And then the command that he has with his hands and his punch also shows up in the run game, where he can just take control of single blocks, discard them with a push-pull. I don't really think he's explosive enough into his rush to threaten the outside shoulder, especially in the NFL. He has a pretty narrow set of pass rushing moves and just doesn't have enough of an arsenal, I think, to get quick wins. And then I really like the way that he initiates speed to power, strong hands, low pads. He just doesn't consistently roll his hips and churn his legs through the block, so his bull rush ends up stalling out pretty often. At 23, I've got Kaimon Rucker out of North Carolina. He's going to close out this tier of mid to late day 3 edge rushers. He missed about half of the 2024 season with a fractured fibula, came back and played a few games but didn't end up testing. He's an undersized player, doesn't really have a prototypical frame for the NFL. I think he's definitely a good athlete. I wouldn't say he's a special athlete for his size, but of all the players in this tier, I just have the most faith in Rucker becoming a rotational contributor. He has probably the most extensive moveset of any edge rusher in this class that I watched, at least. When I write notes on these players, I'll write down like what they win with, and then I'll put a tally or an X to kind of get a picture of how often they used certain moves and like what the distribution looks like. When I got done with Rucker's tape, I had written down pretty much every pass rushing move that exists except for a spin move. He really throws the whole kitchen sink at his opponent, and going into the matchup, they got to be prepared to counter everything. And it's not like he just uses a bunch of moves. He's proficient with them. As a speed rusher, he has good lower body flexibility to turn the corner, good acceleration. That also translates to a very dependable speed to power. We'll get into this more with some other players in this class, but there's a lot of edge rushers this year that have a similar build to this, where they're 6'1", 6'2", like 255 to 265. And something that I've never understood is the way that people talk about height when it comes to certain positions in the NFL draft. Obviously, you want tall players at quarterback, receiver, tight end. I don't know why you would ever want a tall player on the line of scrimmage. One of the most fundamental aspects of trench play is playing with leverage. And it's so much easier to do that if you're already shorter, and so you don't have to bend at the waist to get underneath your opponent's pads. I mean, like, look up a scouting report from Jalon Walker, for example. I haven't read any of them, but I would guess that the first thing on the strength section is going to be, he's this massive, hulking defensive tackle, 6'7", whatever. And then the first thing on the weaknesses section is going to be that he plays tall, doesn't have good pad level. It's like, man, I wonder if those two things are maybe connected. So I knew I was going to get into this rant at some point. It applies to Kaimon Rucker. It's going to apply to a lot of other players that we talk about. Being short, to me, is a good thing if you're playing on the line of scrimmage, and being tall is a bad thing. When I do these athletic scores, they're weighted differently by position, but for edge rushers, defensive tackles, offensive linemen, height has a very small weight. And if you get to a certain point, it actually starts to decrease your overall athletic score for how I calculate it. But yeah, Kaimon Rucker being 6'1", that really gives him an advantage as a power rusher because he plays with such good pad level consistently. On top of his speed to power and his primary speed rushing moves, he has a really good feel for inside counters late in the rep. He uses what's called a hump move. I like to call it an underhook for obvious reasons, to kind of pry open the inside shoulder if the tackle starts to lean or open his hips. He's got that queued up and activated at all times to take advantage of an opening. He's also constantly jabbing at the edges of the block mid-rush to kind of probe for a cleaner entry point into the pocket. He does struggle with more reactive counters just because of his lack of length. So like when he gets clamped, he has a hard time freeing himself. But yeah, really smart and mature pass rushing approach. Now, when I was getting through Kaimon Rucker's tape, I initially liked him a lot more than I have him graded as right now. I watched the 2024 tape, and then I watched I think 7 or 8 games from 2023. And on the 2023 tape, I started with Duke because it was a matchup with Graham Barton, best competition that he faced. He had him in hell for that entire matchup. But then there were two really concerning games for me, the Minnesota game and the NC State game, where he was facing more prototypical NFL tackles. Went up against Ariante Ursary, and Minnesota has a right tackle. I forget his name, but he'll probably be like drafted or a UDFA. And then Anthony Belton for NC State, who's like the biggest offensive lineman in this class. They really just engulfed him, and when they got their hands on him, kind of shut down the rep on first contact. I think that kind of shows where he could fail at the NFL level. When he faces a bigger tackle that can somewhat match his speed, he just might not really have a trait advantage in any particular area. At 22, I've got Kyle Kennard out of South Carolina, and he's 152 on my overall big board, which is lower than pretty much everybody else has him ranked. He's 77th on the consensus board. Almost everybody's got him as a top 100 player. I don't think this is as much of like a disagreement on the evaluation as it is people watching tape from earlier in the year and kind of basing their grade off of that, and haven't gotten to his later tape yet and like updated their rankings. I did the same thing. I mean, he looked great early in the year, and I think at some point I definitely had a third round grade on him, but at this point it would shock me if he went in the top 100. So his pass rush win rate from weeks 1 to 8 was 18.1%. Weeks 9 through 14, it fell all the way to 7.8%. And that includes games against Vanderbilt and Wofford. So he's a fifth-year senior, transfer from Georgia Tech, a ton of experience over the last 3 to 4 years. Never was really that productive until 2024. Started the year on fire, had a great performance once again against Will Campbell. Cooled off dramatically as the season went on and just wasn't able to find as much success. He has 34-inch arms and really violent hands, uses a cross chop and a ghost rip, and then has pretty good lateral quickness to slash inside with inside counters, but his bend is pretty average and a lot of potential wins get turned into drive-by pressures, and then he isn't a very effective power rusher at all. Also gets moved around and driven out of gaps in the run game pretty frequently. My 21st ranked edge rusher is Jared Ivey out of Ole Miss, a historically bad tester and somebody that's definitely like a hybrid interior edge player. I see him kind of in the mold of somebody like Danico Autry. Really good size, long arms, highly skilled hand usage as a pass rusher. He's got a varied repertoire with swipes, chops, swims, counters. His bull rush is above average, but at 6'6", it's kind of hard to play with good enough leverage to win, as consistently as you would expect given his size. I think Jared Ivey's timing and skill set as a pass rusher makes him worth drafting on day 3. Just the lack of athletic traits, I think, could limit him. At edge 20, I've got Jack Sawyer out of Ohio State, consistently a top 50 to 75 player on people's boards. I just don't really see an NFL athlete. He's 6'4", 260 with T-Rex arms, a deceptively narrow base, which kind of gives him some issues when it comes to setting the edge. Overall, his play strength is good, but I still worry that he might get washed out of gaps in the NFL occasionally. I mean, it happens in college sometimes. He's a solid power rusher, a pretty skilled hand fighter. He's got a nice double swipe, but I think the explosiveness and quickness are very below average, and he just has a debilitating lack of bend. He is so tight trying to turn the corner. Didn't test at all, and he's not injured. It's hard for me to say that's a bad decision because I don't think he would have tested very well. I mean, the 3-cone might have started with an 8, which is a slight exaggeration, but I mean, he can't bend. That's just not going to be a part of his game. I think his path to seeing the field is going to be as a high energy run defender, and I'm sure he's going to get drafted earlier than 143, but I would let another team take him probably. At 19, I've got Sai'vion Jones out of LSU. 6'5", 283 pounds, 34-inch arms, similar to Jared Ivey where he's got that hybrid build, but I think Jones is a much better athlete. Now, his upfield burst I don't think is going to be overly threatening to NFL tackles, but I thought Sai'vion Jones had rare bend for a player of his size. I mean, there are some eye-popping reps of him turning the corner at a 0-degree angle. He mainly uses a cross chop and speed to power. He can really crush the tackle's outside hand when it hits. And then same thing with his bull rush. When it hits, it's devastating and just annihilates his opponent's anchor. But I thought he was really inconsistent both as a power rusher and as a hand fighter. Despite some dominant flashes, his bull rush just stalls out a lot more often than you would like. And then on top of being pretty one-dimensional in terms of his moveset, I thought he just got outskilled a lot as a pass rusher. There's a lot of plays where he loses to the flash bait technique, which I'll put on the screen, but it's basically, tackles flash their outside hand, bait out the cross chop, retreat, and then come in with a two-hand punch. He gets pretty easily neutralized by early punches and jump sets. Doesn't anticipate and counter aggressive strikes very effectively. And then one of the drawbacks of having such a big frame is that it's also a big strike zone for the blocker. So when he raises his arms to initiate a move, they can kind of get their hands on him and clamp him up a lot more easily than smaller, more slender pass rushers. My 18th ranked edge rusher is Elijah Roberts out of SMU, the heaviest player in this edge class at 292 pounds. Has good length, incredibly productive in 2024, led the FBS in hurries. I think he'll probably be an interior player in the NFL, at least a hybrid, and he was one of my favorite players in this class to watch. He is so skilled as a pass rusher. I do think the lack of explosiveness and twitch will probably limit him in the NFL though. So I have him with the highest rating for hand usage and pass rushing counters. It's so rare to see a college player with his ability to string moves together and transition into counters. So his pass rushing plan kind of starts out with a very dependable bull rush. He has some dominant wins, but also pushes the pocket consistently. He uses a cross chop and has an extremely high connect rate and really heavy hands. So he's accurate and forceful, pinning his opponent's hand, collapsing the edge of the block, but he's just so clever and perceptive when it comes to getting into counters. A lot of players like pre-snap, they say, okay, I'm going cross chop here, and then they're going to use a cross chop regardless of what the tackle does, and they're going to ride with that move until the rep ends or they get put on the ground. Elijah Roberts never hesitates to deviate from his initial move if he sees a better way of winning or a clearer path into the pocket. He reads the tackle's set, he reads and anticipates their punch, and throughout the play, he's constantly diagnosing their body positioning and then immediately reacting when he sees an entry point. He really just puts blockers in a no-win situation because he's so quick to react and take whichever lane they give him. Now, I think he partially offsets his lack of explosiveness and suddenness with rapid transitions and violence into contact. All of his movements are extremely decisive and purposeful, and so even though he isn't really threatening from an athleticism standpoint, he can still kind of catch blockers off guard because there's no lag or loading time in between each segment of the rush. But with that being said, in the NFL, I do think his marginal athleticism will be much more of a limitation. For one thing, he just doesn't have the edge speed to threaten the outside track. Really choppy, short strides upfield that lose ground on the tackle when he's trying to recover. But then the other element of that is that so much of his game in college was predicated on baiting the tackle into putting themselves in a compromising position and then taking advantage of them messing up, essentially. So like all these plays where he's getting the tackle to open up and then ripping through to the inside, when I try to project that to the NFL, it's just like, why would an NFL tackle ever open their hips against Elijah Roberts? There's just not enough speed or quickness to where a pro tackle would ever need to do anything but just stay square with him. So you probably project Elijah Roberts to move inside, and I think he can be a solidly productive pass rusher from the interior. He's not a bad run defender, but I was definitely expecting a little bit more given his size. A lot of it, I think, kind of comes down to motor and play recognition. Seems like he was sort of saving himself for pass rushing downs, which he played a ton. I think that's a perfectly reasonable trade-off to make, but he doesn't read blocks very quickly. He gets reached on the front side of zone runs a lot. There were several plays where he got reached and it was a perfectly legal block, and then he's lobbying the ref for a holding call. Not very rangy when it comes to defending read options. and a very mediocre tackler as well. My 17th ranked edge is JT Tuimoloau out of Ohio State. Very sturdy build with almost 35-inch arms. I think he's one of the best run defenders in this edge class and a very skilled pass rusher, but I'm not sure he's athletic enough to contribute a whole lot on passing downs. He's a pretty good power rusher. His length gives him such an advantage there because he can make first contact. The tackle can try to reach back into his frame and recover, but he's just grasping at air. Has really good pad level with his bull rush, but not super explosive into contact. And I think tries to overcompensate with that with excessive leaning and lunging, which leaves him susceptible to snatch traps. He's really creative as a pass rusher and has a layered moveset, but just isn't athletic enough to win with a lot of the moves that he tries. You know, he had 51 pressures, 15 sacks this past season, only an 11% win rate though, and when you watch his tape, a lot of the pressures are unblocked, stunts, cleanup, pursuit, coverage sacks, kind of lower quality when it comes to projecting to the NFL. But I mean, he's an outstanding run defender, length to control and separate from blocks, doesn't get moved off the line of scrimmage, does a really good job of reading through blocks and into the backfield. He will have a role on early downs. I'm just not really intrigued by what he gives you as a pass rusher. My 16th ranked edge rusher is Josaiah Stewart out of Michigan. Extreme size outlier, 6'1", 249 pounds. Under 33-inch arms. But if I'm going to bet on somebody who's this much of an outlier, their tape needs to look like Josaiah Stewart's. You know, I still think his size is going to limit him in some areas, but he did about as much as humanly possible to answer my concerns. So he has rare explosiveness to threaten the outside track, can beat tackles to their set points and win the corner, rapid changing direction. So he's putting maximum stress on both edges of the block, but then he's able to channel that first step explosiveness into a devastating speed to power. It shouldn't be possible for a player of his size to win with power as consistently as he does, but he makes it happen. I do have some concerns with Stewart as a pass rusher. So he's exclusively a wide 9 in the NFL. You watch most of these plays where he's winning with power. He's got a long runway to build up momentum, and he's going to need that in the NFL. I don't think he's very skilled or precise with his hands, and his lack of length kind of limits his margin for error. He's also not as bendy and flexible as you would expect for a player of his size. And then the other thing is that he was kind of a level of competition merchant in a lot of ways. Against the two best offensive lines that he faced, which were Texas and Oregon, he just couldn't really get anything going. Something you learn when you scout an entire edge class is obviously who the good edge rushers are, but also who the bad tackles are. And every year I kind of figure out like what teams did every player have their best game against. This year it was Pittsburgh after they lost their starting left tackle, just brutal tackle play. Mississippi State in the SEC, every SEC pass rusher had their best game against Mississippi State. And then in the Big Ten, it was USC and Washington, which are the two games that Josaiah Stewart absolutely dominated. I mentioned how his speed to power ability is kind of hard to fathom for a player of his size. That goes double for what he does as a run defender. He just has an insane motor, an insane level of physicality. He is willing to lay his body on the line, blow up a puller, just superhuman edge setting ability for a 249-pound edge defender. I understand like his anchor is probably not going to be great in the NFL, but I get similar vibes with Stewart's tape as I did watching Nolan Smith, where it's just like he's such a good run defender that it's got to translate to a certain extent. My edge 15 is Landon Jackson out of Arkansas, who has probably my least favorite tape in this edge class, and I don't say that as a criticism to him. The way that Arkansas used him just resulted in so many wasted reps that are just not translatable to the NFL. He played so many snaps as a 4-eye, so inside shade of the tackle, and you know, he wasn't a productive or effective pass rusher. The rush angles that he was given based on his alignment just didn't set him up for success at all. He's got a sturdy, athletic frame, a little bit taller than I would like, but good size and length, a 93rd percentile wingspan, tested very well in certain drills, 40.5-inch vertical, 129-inch broad. If we're trying to evaluate his linear straight line explosiveness though, I think the 46th percentile 10-yard split speaks a lot more to what you see on tape. He's pretty flexible for a 6'6" player, but at his height, there's just going to be limitations dipping and getting low enough to bend the corner. He's a pretty good run defender. Again, his build gives him some disadvantages when blockers are able to win leverage, but overall, really like what he gives you on early downs. But as a pass rusher, ultimately, I think his athleticism is just going to be outclassed by NFL tackles. He has a severely one-dimensional pass rushing approach and doesn't win with power. Again, I think it comes back to him being 6'6". He's almost never lower than the guy that he's trying to bull rush. He pretty much just spams a cross chop every play. And like I said, his alignment did him no favors, but when he did get those outside rush opportunities, I just didn't think he was very effective overall. He had some really nice wins against Will Campbell, but just a lot of plays where he might even chop the outside hand accurately, have kind of an opening where he's cleared a path around the edge. He just doesn't have that burst to really finish the play. My 14th ranked edge rusher is Nic Scourton out of Texas A&M. Definitely the biggest faller from the summer to now in this edge class. I had him as a top 5 player heading into the year based on his Purdue tape, but this was just not a good year for him at all. I will say, if somebody came back from the future and told me there's going to be one player in this edge class that you severely underrated, my first guess would be Nic Scourton, because there is a reasonable explanation for why there was such a drop-off. Already was kind of an average athlete, but adding 15, 20 pounds, made him even less athletic. I just think it's hard to watch his tape from this past season and really project him winning against NFL tackles. So he's 6'3", dropped back down to 257 pounds. When he weighed in at the combine, he was 285, at least listed at that on Texas A&M's website. Average length and didn't test, which I think that alone kind of gives you some clues towards his overall athleticism. He's a very technically proficient pass rusher, does a good job of sequencing moves throughout the game. He's got a Euro step cross chop where he'll kind of shorten the corner with an inside jab step, set up the chop to the outside hand, and then he'll fake the cross chop to try to lure the tackle into oversetting, create space for the inside spin. He uses a spin move probably as much as any player in this class. He had a ton of wins with a spin in 2023. This year, I noticed that teams had a guard posted in the B gap like at all times to cut off his spin. So there were a lot of potential wins that he had that just got closed off because he got doubled. But the first step off the line of scrimmage is extremely gradual, not going to beat a deep pass set, and then doesn't really have the bend to corner. He has average lateral quickness to crossover gaps with face-up inside counters, and then his bull rush is surprisingly ineffective for his size. When you evaluate what he brings to the table as a pass rusher, even against SEC tackles, I don't really see one area that he thrives or has a clear advantage besides a spin move. And your go-to trump card as a pass rusher cannot be a spin counter. That's a complementary aspect of your overall pass rushing plan. His cross chop was marginally effective, but really struggled to get any wins with the speed chop, one-hand swipe, side scissors, aka double swipe. As a run defender, he plays with a really high motor, good hand pop to crush ISO blocks, chases down plays from the backside, somebody that slams into blocks with authority, can create some chaos in the backfield, but kind of an erratic tackler. For his size, really concerning lack of contact balance and anchor, and really his only option is to destroy the block early. He doesn't have the length to lock out and control gaps. At 13, I've got David Walker out of Central Arkansas, and edge rusher is a position where I try to be really selective and conservative with the number of exceptions that I make. I try to limit myself to one exception per year. But David Walker is my guy. The tape is just so incredible. He's obviously facing a low level of competition, but he has the most dominant football tape that I've ever seen. I've just never watched a player win seemingly every rep the way that he does. It's like he's playing on sandbox mode. He has 3 years of elite production in both phases, 151 pressures, 37 sacks over the last 3 seasons, had 4 forced fumbles in 2024. He fits the mold of the players that I was talking about, the short, stocky edge rusher with short arms. He's just under 6'1", 263 pounds, under 32-inch arms. The length is definitely a concern for me, and then also the fact that he'll be almost 25 years old, that's a concern. But he's very explosive, he's very quick, he has great bend, his bull rush just obliterates FCS tackles, and then he's got a pretty diverse moveset on top of that. Because he's so short, again, he's got a natural leverage advantage as a power rusher, but it also helps him as a speed rusher because there's such a small strike zone for offensive tackles, so they've really got to lunge and lean down to make contact with him. He's also a relentless high motor run defender, really good pursuit speed and closing bursts, just an absolute force in the backfield. They even drop him into coverage, and like he can cover wheel routes step for step. Incredible range for a 260-pound player. Now, the lack of length hurts him in both ways that it normally does for edge rushers. He's not somebody that's going to be able to stack and shed and separate from blocks in the run game. And then he'll also, I expect, have issues transitioning to counters in the NFL. It's hard to really evaluate from his college tape because he pretty much just wins every rep immediately. His only losses are when he gets chipped or like the offense sends 3 guys to block him. So he doesn't really have much experience, needing to have like a backup plan. I totally get the risk with David Walker, but I think he's got a chance of being a Melvin Ingram, Brandon Graham caliber of pass rusher, and definitely somebody that I would take on day 2. At 12, we've got Ashton Gillotte out of Louisville, and there's a couple guys in competition, but I would probably say this is the most underrated edge rusher in the class. Once again, he's short, stocky, sub 32-inch arms, but outside of the lack of length, I love so much about what he brings to the table as a pass rusher. So he's the perfect example of a player who doesn't necessarily have a ton of different pass rushing moves, but I gave him a really high rating for the move set because I think he just has such a calculated and layered pass rushing plan. He has multiple sets of complementary moves that are effective in their own right, but also build off of each other. So the first kind of sequence that you'll see is the bull rush or long arm into the stab chop, which is an extremely common 1-2 punch for NFL edge rushers. I think he's arguably the best power rusher in this class. Low pad level, relentless leg drive. He's a really good athlete, and he confirmed that with his testing, so he's got good explosiveness into contact. His power rush game is something that opponents have to respect. They've got to be prepared for it. So he'll hit you with power a few times, then he'll go to his change up, which is a stab chop. He stabs the opponent's frame, acts like he's going power. That draws out the 2-hand punch, and then he chops down the outside hand, creates a path around the corner. That 2-move sequence, like I said, is a tried and true way of winning in the NFL, but then he'll also hit you with a cross chop hump move combo. He's explosive enough to beat tackles around the edge. He uses the cross chop to grease the corner. Even though he doesn't have ideal length, he's really accurate and precise with his hands. So the cross chop has a pretty high success rate as a primary move. But then after he's won with that a few times, when he starts to accelerate upfield and threaten that high side rush, it's going to influence tackles to open their hips or overset, and then he can take advantage of that with the hump move or underhook, where he's hooking under the inside arm, prying open the B gap. Gillotte just has such a smart pass rushing plan and also has the athletic traits for that to translate in the NFL. So I'm very confident about his floor as being at least a productive, contributing pass rusher. I wish he was a little bit better as a run defender. I don't think he's somebody that's going to be pigeonholed into being like a designated pass rusher. He can definitely be on the field on early downs. He has extremely violent hands and textbook stack shed technique, which I think partially offsets his lack of length. He completely ragdolls tight ends like on the backside of inside zone. Not somebody you really feel comfortable with blocking one-on-one with a tight end, but his anchor I think is below average to keep his footing when he isn't able to separate from blocks, which does happen occasionally. Next up, I've got Ole Miss edge rusher Princely Umanmielen. At the combine, he was 6'4", 244 pounds. But I've got absolutely no clue what this dude actually weighs. At Ole Miss, he was listed at 255, which I think kind of matches the eye test. Shows up at the Senior Bowl at 264, which is a great weight for him. But then at the Combine, he's 244. I guess just midpointing it and saying like 255 probably makes sense as like his playing weight. He has over 34-inch arms, tested pretty well, and he's a really good athlete on tape. He's been very productive, 100 pressures and 18 sacks over the last 2 seasons. His pass rushing tape is kind of strange though, because he's got a quick first step, pretty good bend. The results for 2 years against SEC competition are pretty hard to deny. I watched the majority of his 2023 tape at Florida last year because for a while I thought he was going to be in that class. He's just an aggressively like one-dimensional pass rusher. He's basically just going speed, cross chop, 30 snaps a game, and like every week he'll get 6 or 7 pressures out of that. Doesn't really have precise hands or a nuanced pass rushing plan. It's extremely predictable, but he's athletic enough that it was still effective. Now, over the second half of 2024, he started to mix in an inside spin counter, which is good to see. He absolutely abused Georgia's tackles with that move in week 11. I will say though, the spin move is pretty clunky and like not very fluid or sudden. He'll convert speed to power occasionally, but I wasn't very impressed with his bull rush overall. He's kind of just a player that has a fastball that he doesn't really deviate from. Didn't need to in the SEC, but I think he probably will in the NFL because he's not like an overwhelming athlete. If he can do that though, I think he's got a chance to be a really good number 2 edge rusher. At edge 10, I have Femi Oladejo out of UCLA. He was miscast as an off-ball linebacker for most of his career. Didn't actually fully transition to edge until really like week 5 of the 2024 season. He has a compact build with pretty good length. He's explosive. I think there are flashes of him being able to really bend the corner at tight angles. And for somebody that's so new to the position, there are some promising flashes on tape of him kind of being a step ahead in his development. He had a dominant performance against Penn State in week 6. Played really well, I thought, against Minnesota and Iowa, but he pretty much only has a cross chop, some flashes of a nice speed to power, but doesn't use that nearly as often as you would expect for his, like short, stout build with long arms. Like I would have thought that would be his primary go-to move. And when you watch his tape as a whole, there's just a lot of games and a lot of long stretches where he isn't able to find a win. His hands aren't always accurate. His timing is pretty inconsistent. Doesn't have much of a counter plan. When he does use power, he initiates it with low pads, but has a bad habit of standing up during the drive phase, which kind of nullifies his power output. But his flashes are really exciting and worth betting on day 2, in my opinion. And then I thought his tape in the run game was awesome. You can tell that he's a former off-ball linebacker when you look at his pursuit range, closeout burst, very high motor player. He has heavy hands to just annihilate blocks. You see the upper body torque where he can really like rip and uproot a blocker's anchor. Somebody that if he can continue to expand his arsenal, I think projects as a quality 3-down rusher. Next up, we've got Jordan Burch out of Oregon, a player that I've been watching for a couple years because he's been on the draft radar for a while. Former 5-star recruit, so he's always on the preseason watch list. And last year, I remember watching his tape and just being so underwhelmed. Didn't have high hopes for him this year, but man, he had to be one of the most improved players in college football. So really imposing size profile, 6'4", 282 pounds, good length. He wins most often with power, and I have him as the 3rd best power rusher in this class. He's got the explosiveness and hand pop to create early knockback, and then he can sustain his bull rush and put the tackle in reverse. He also has a really effective cross chop and won several times with an inside spin. Overall, though, he does need to diversify his pass rushing plan. It's pretty basic at this point, but even though he's kind of a late bloomer, I think he's so close to being where he needs to be, and just has a winning combination for projecting it to the NFL. Now, as a run defender, he is very solid and sturdy, but not very disruptive. His anchor is pretty much immovable, sets a very firm edge. He's an automatic wrap-up tackler, only 2 missed tackles over the last 2 seasons, but he just doesn't make a lot of plays in the run game. He's a lot more content to just hold the point, only had 5 run stops in 2024. You want to see him play with more violence and assertiveness in that phase, but the tools are definitely there, and it's not like he's going to be a liability in any way. My edge 8 is Donovan Ezeiruaku out of Boston College, somebody that I hated ranking this low because he's one of my favorite players in this class. Definitely top 5 on the That Boy Nice rankings. He had elite production in 2024. He led the Power 4 in sacks and run stops. He's 6'2.5", 248 pounds, but has 34.5-inch arms, which is 84th percentile. I think he has the best bend in this edge class, and I think he has the most precise cross chop. He got like 4 to 5 wins with his cross chop every game. Does a really good job of using the inside Euro step to manipulate the tackle's set depth, create a short corner, and then he pretty much never misses with the cross chop, and he has the bend to flatten and finish the play. And then he pairs that with an equally effective club swim as an inside counter, also mixed in the spin move a few times later in the year. It's an extremely simple pass rushing plan, but like I said, you don't need a ton of moves. Like if you've got 2 things that are unblockable and you can just throw that 1-2 punch at a tackle across the entire game, like that's enough to win in the NFL. But in my opinion, Donovan Ezeiruaku has a dangerous combination of weaknesses that could really limit his ceiling in the NFL. He's a pure speed rusher who isn't very explosive and cannot win with power. I watched pretty much every game from 2024, and he just can't win with power against FBS competition. He had a couple dominant wins against the FCS team they played in like week 2, and then he won a couple times against Pittsburgh, who, like I said, had I think the worst tackle play in the Power 4 after Branson Taylor got injured. Against every other team, he just couldn't create any push. He understands that it's not very effective because he rarely tries it, but when he does, it just went nowhere. So what worries me about players like this is he has really one way of winning that tackles can sell out to stop, but he doesn't have the top end burst or speed to really compete and win the corner consistently against NFL tackles. If he was an elite explosive athlete, I think he could get away with not having a power profile because he could just kind of outrun tackles. But because he doesn't have a bull rush to keep tackles honest, I think the fact that he isn't an elite athlete has a chance to get exposed in the NFL. With that being said, this is still a player that I really like. I just like him as a number 2 rusher. My edge 7 is Bradyn Swinson out of LSU. For most of the draft process, if you would have asked me who the most underrated player in this class was, I would have said Bradyn Swinson, but a lot of people have gotten to his tape and he's now kind of being appropriately rated, at least. I've been a huge fan of him since I first watched him in like week 2. I think I put him in the first round of a mock draft in like early October. So he led the SEC with 60 pressures in 2024. He has a cross chop, double swipe, ghost move, inside counter, and a really good speed to power. He's kind of a B to B plus athlete, 6'3.5", 255 pounds. Solid length. I think he is really explosive. His bend is more average, but he did run a nice 3-cone. Not an elite athlete, but definitely someone I would say is NFL caliber. I just think like you've got an athletic pass rusher who is highly productive against the best competition, has multiple ways of winning to keep tackles honest and guessing. He may never be a number 1 guy, but I think he's got a really high floor as a number 2 pass rusher. His run defense isn't great. If he was a better run defender, he would be a lot higher up on this list. But yeah, man, Bradyn Swinson, one of my guys in this class for sure. All right, moving on up into the early 2nd round grades, we've got James Pearce Jr. out of Tennessee coming in at edge 6. And this dude is an absolute enigma. One of the weirdest combinations of strengths and weaknesses, and somebody that just like doesn't play how you would expect in any phase. So he's an elite linear athlete, 6'5", 248 pounds. Wish he had longer arms. The combine arm length measurements were way off this year, so I'm just going with the highest number between combine and pro day, which it's done by NFL scouts for both of them. It's not like a school bias thing, which a lot of people think it is, but had like sub 33 inch arms at the combine, 33 inches at his pro day. His vertical jump was weirdly awful. And when that number came in, I thought we were in for like a Ja'Kai Polite combine performance, and like he's just going to tank his draft stock. Bounce back with a solid broad jump and then elite 10-yard split and 40-yard dash. So when you watch him on tape, I think the first step quickness absolutely shows up. He can win the edge as a speed rusher, but doesn't do it as often as you would expect. His bend is not great. He's got a pretty nice like swipe move to clear the edge. Not a very diverse move set for the most part, although there were a couple times that he won with a double swipe and a cross chop. I actually thought his most impressive wins were with inside counters. Like, he is really quick crossing the blocker's face, shooting into the inside gap. He's a surprisingly capable power rusher. For somebody that is tall, slender, and has short arms, you normally would expect that to be the weakest part of their pass rushing profile. Now, he is very explosive, so that works in his favor, but normally this kind of player would either not be able to generate any speed to power, or when they do, it would only come in like dominant flashes, like a Quay Robinson type of player. There were a couple plays, usually against worse competition, where he did just like flatten his opponent with power. But what was surprising about James Pearce is how he was able to consistently push the pocket. He's very upright, but I mean, he just makes it work. My biggest hang up with James Pearce as a pass rusher is that he really needs to strike first to win the hand fight. When he gets tied up, he can't really break contact, and there's not a whole lot of secondary rush effort with him. And when I say rush effort, I don't mean like him trying. I just mean him being able to recapture that momentum. And then his run defense is really interesting. When I watched him over the summer, I thought that was the clear weakness of his game. He would kind of get bullied in the run game, just didn't have a strong anchor at all. You watch him in 2023, and it's like the number one takeaway is he needs to add weight, get more sturdy as a run defender. He shows up this year looking like the exact same player, doesn't look like he touched a weight over the summer, and some of the stuff that's come out about him skipping workouts, I mean, yeah, I can see it by looking at him. But then on tape, he's so much better holding the point and anchoring in 2024. I don't remember seeing him getting put on the ground once last year. He has good motor, unlimited range to chase down outside runs, had pretty much a game-winning forced fumble against Florida in week 7. I kind of like don't know what to make of him in the run game. The tape is pretty good, but part of me just doesn't buy it translating to the NFL. Very weird player to project. Now, the off-field and like football character stuff with James Pearce, I think is worth mentioning. I'm not a psychiatrist, so it doesn't affect my grade, but there's a lot of concerning stuff that's come out about his work ethic and like what he's like in the locker room. And I can kind of confirm some of that independently. From all accounts, seems like a lot to deal with, and it would surprise me at this point if he went in the first round, even though I think he's a top 32 player based on tape and talent. And then at edge 5, we've got Jalon Walker out of Georgia, who seems like the polar opposite from a football character perspective. I mean, based on the just overwhelmingly glowing reviews that he gets, it's like he cured cancer and spends his free time helping old ladies cross the street. Now, every year there are players that I watch that everybody has a really high grade on them, and I just don't like their tape. This year, there seems to be a lot more players that I really like, but I'm just shocked by like how high they go in mock drafts and how high they are on people's boards. Jalon Walker is one of those players. Jahdae Barron out of Texas, Trey Amos out of Ole Miss. These are all players that I evaluated, right at the end of the season before all the rankings were out. And if you would have told me at that time that I would end up being this much lower on them, I would have been very surprised. But every conversation in the draft is it's relative to how other people view them. So you kind of get forced into talking down on players that just in a vacuum you really like. And Jalon Walker is the perfect example of that. So he split time between linebacker and edge rusher. I am evaluating him purely as an edge. I don't even really see him as a particularly versatile player because I thought his linebacker tape was extremely underwhelming. He's fast, and I think he does a decent job playing off of blocks, but just does not read things quickly in the run game. And if you look at PFF, it'll say that he has, 178 coverage snaps. Those are not 178 plays of him dropping into coverage. It's him hovering 4 to 5 yards past the line of scrimmage and being a QB spy. So yeah, as an off-ball linebacker, I mean, there's not really a whole lot there to me. Would probably have definitely a day 3 grade if it was just purely that position, and probably a mid to late one. But the pass rushing tape is where you really get intrigued with Jalon Walker. He's explosive. He's got shock in his hands, a relentless pursuit motor, great pursuit speed. I think he's got some really dynamic traits as a pass rusher. Where I start to get kind of lost though is with the top 10 hype. This is an undersized, sawed-off pass rusher whose primary move is a long arm. He's definitely a very good athlete, but it's not like Micah Parsons level or anything. I just feel like if you explained that profile to someone, it would sound like an early second round pick, which is the grade I have on him. Now he's my 20th ranked player because this class is just not good. His hands are pretty unpolished. He's surprisingly stiff bending the corner, and most of his production was like as a spy player, mugged up over the A gap. Not really as many quick wins on tape that translate to the next level. So I'm definitely off base with a lot of people as far as, projecting him as a top 10 pick. I still really like him as a player. I think he'll be a good starter. And I will say taking him in the top 10 would be a lot less egregious in this class. I think there are 3 blue chip players this year: Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, and Ashton Gillotte. Gillette's a running back, so that kind of diminishes his value. And then you've got Tennessee taking a quarterback at 1. I think most likely once you get outside of the top 5, you're going to be picking players that would have gone like 25 last year. And more so than most classes, I have a pretty big log jam between my 10th ranked player and my 30th ranked player. I just don't see a huge gap in grades between those guys. So for a team like the Panthers at 8, for example, if they're just looking at who's available to them and they're like, okay, Jalon Walker might not have the measurables, maybe we have a lower grade on him than some other players, but we know that we're going to get an elite character, foundational leadership type of guy. I'm not super opposed to them doing that. So when he inevitably goes top 10, even though it'll be a reach on my board, I'm not going to kill the team for doing that because I kind of get it. And I don't think the stakes are that high. I don't think you're passing up future all-pros to pick this player. All right, edge 4 for me is going to be Shemar Stewart out of Texas A&M. So much discourse about this player. All right, where do I want to start? So I feel like with Shemar Stewart, I could sit here for 30 minutes and just argue with myself and play both sides of the discussion. So the absolute casual take on Shemar Stewart is you pull up his ESPN page. He's got 1.5 sacks each of the last 3 years, and you just say this guy isn't productive, he's not a good player. Obviously, that's not the kind of analysis that I try to do or that NFL teams will do, but that's kind of the starting point for a lot of people. So then the response to that is to say, well, yeah, he has a finishing problem, but he's actually really disruptive. He had 39 pressures last year. He needs to get better at converting those opportunities, but this is somebody that's going to force the quarterback to speed up their process. He's going to get them to break the pocket, all that good stuff. And I'm the type of person that generally would make that argument. I'm a pressures and pass rush win rate over sacks type of guy. But then the response to his pressure totals is these are not high quality pass rushing wins. He might get 4 pressures in a game, but if you actually watch them, 3 of them are late in the down coverage kind of pressures. He might have one where he's chasing a bootleg to the sideline. He didn't have 39 clean pass rushing wins last year. But then the pro Shemar Stewart argument would be he didn't have a lot of clean wins because Texas A&M's scheme didn't give him a lot of true one-on-one opportunities. He played about a quarter of his snaps at 4-eye, where he doesn't have those favorable rush angles. Lining up inside the tackle just doesn't lend itself to getting a lot of wins, especially if you're taking an outside rush track. The counter to that is if you split his win rate by alignment, it still doesn't look that much better. 13.2% pass rush win rate when he was lined up outside. That's not very good, but you still can't always look at win rate, even if it's separated by edge, and draw firm conclusions about a player's pass rushing ability. And that's especially relevant to Shemar Stewart because his job on every play was not to fire up field and get a quick win. There's a high percentage of reps where he's contain rushing or just told to slowly push the pocket. So many snaps going into the denominator of that pass rush win rate calculation that aren't actual pass rush attempts. So to actually evaluate his ability as a pass rusher, you've got to watch the tape, find the reps where he's actually trying to win, and then evaluate that. The thing with Shemar Stewart, though, is when you do that, you end up just coming to the exact same conclusion as the guy who looked up his ESPN page. Even when you go through the long back and forth and you take all of the context into account, he is just straight up not skilled enough to win as a pass rusher in the NFL right now. He's clunky, indecisive, lacks precision and accuracy with his swipes and chops. He's very robotic and segmented, transitioning between each phase of a move. It doesn't all happen in one fluid motion. It's like you can tell his defensive line coach put up, bullet points for how to execute a cross chop or whatever, and he's just going through point by point, like, okay, now I step here, now I chop across my body, oh wait, now I gotta turn. It's like it doesn't all happen quickly and smoothly enough to really win. There's a consistent lack of coordination between his hands and his feet. That especially shows up as a power rusher. Based on his speed and explosiveness, he should be like one of the best power rushers of all time when you just look at the pure momentum that he's able to generate into contact. But there's so many plays where he isn't pointing his hips towards the block, and so that force isn't being applied in a straight line towards his opponent. He also doesn't do a good job of landing his punch inside to centralize the force, and his pad level is also kind of a mess. The Shemar Stewart discussion kind of gets oversimplified at times as like he's just a bad finisher, but no, he really struggles to win as a pass rusher, especially against good competition. Take PFF grades with a grain of salt. I think they're better than a lot of stats, but far from perfect. Pass rushing grades are some of their better grades, I think, and it's a good way of broadly estimating efficiency. Stewart had 3 games last year with a PFF pass rushing grade over 70. And they came against Mississippi State, who, like I said, was the worst offensive tackle play in the SEC, some of the worst in all of Power 4, Bowling Green, and then McNeese, and he only rushed the passer 6 times in that game. There's just really not a whole lot of proof of concept of him winning as a one-on-one pass rusher. But the reason I still have a relatively high grade on him is that he's probably the 3rd most athletic edge prospect since 2017. I think Myles Garrett would be 1, Travon Walker would be 2. Those guys are both more fluid and bendy than Shemar Stewart is, but I don't know who else you would take over Stewart. Obviously, you would rather have the edge rushers that are technically advanced and freak athletes. Those guys go in the top 5 to 10, but the later you get into the first round and onto day 2 and day 3, you're pretty much having to make the choice between athleticism and production. My philosophy is different for different positions, but for edge, give me the athletic traits 10 times out of 10. So just now, I pulled up RAS. You can do this at home. Went to defensive end, 2015 to 2024, and just look at the first page of the most athletic defensive end prospects. I think there's 5 busts on this list. Jordan Willis, Jeffrey Gunter, Jabari Zuniga, Peyton Turner's kind of an injury thing, but I'll count him. And then Vic Beasley, I guess I would count as a bust, but he at least had flashes of production. There seems to be this sentiment of when do these athletic projects ever work out? And it's this major risk to take an athletic defensive end or edge rusher that is, unrefined technically. I think it's a bigger risk to take a technically advanced pass rusher with limited athletic traits. That archetype of player has a way higher bust rate. Pass rushing technique is important, but a bit overrated at times. You got to be better than Shemar Stewart is right now, but he's a rare enough athlete that I don't think it's insurmountable. In the meantime, he can be a force on stunts and twists. I think his ability to disrupt in the run game is unmatched in this class, but got to improve the tackling, get a bit more consistent there. But my edge 3 with just a slightly higher grade is going to be Mykel Williams out of Georgia. Not a player that seems to have a lot of fans right now, but as long as he's not being talked about as a top 5 prospect, I would be excited to add Mykel Williams to my team. He kind of gets grouped together with Shemar Stewart sometimes, and there are similarities for sure, but I think some clear distinctions that I would make between them. They're both players that you're drafting for their athletic traits who haven't put it all together as pass rushers, but I think Mykel Williams is a significantly worse athlete than Shemar Stewart and significantly ahead of him as a pass rusher. Now, saying that really speaks more to how rare of an athlete Shemar Stewart is and how bad he is technically, because I think Mykel Williams is a really good athlete, and I think he still has a long ways to go as a pass rusher. So he has a long athletic frame, 88th percentile wingspan, 267 pounds. Disappointing how many edge rushers decided not to test this year, because it's kind of the most important position for athletic testing. but Mykel Williams did run the 40 at his pro day. It's crazy. When the first number came out, everyone on Twitter was like, oh, this is the great athlete that you've been telling me about. And then it turns out that he ran a 45th percentile 40-yard dash at 267 pounds, which is perfectly fine, and had a 70th percentile 10-yard split. It's like, yeah, that size explosiveness combination is pretty good and first round caliber. I also think he has pretty good lateral quickness to win with crossface moves as a pass rusher. His most effective move was like a club arm over, but he is pretty stiff trying to bend at the top of the rush. I think that does kind of limit his upside as a speed rusher. Now, one of the first things I wrote down in my notes when I watched him is that he has tight ankles, but he was playing through an ankle injury in 2024. So that kind of, would explain it to an extent, but I don't think it's too off base to say that the 6'5", long linear pass rusher is kind of tight. He has a pass rushing plan that's kind of in development. Mentioned the cross-face counter moves, had some success last year with a one-hand swipe and a cross chop. You see on that play against Texas how his length allows him to attack the quarterback's windup and get strip sacks, but doesn't have quite the level of technical refinement, I think, to win against tackles right now. Still pretty mechanical executing moves. And I was really disappointed with his bull rush. The shock on initial contact is real. Like, he rattles the pads and softens the anchor when he lands his punch, but you just rarely see him be able to drive through the block and actually finish those reps because his pad level is so high. But the reason I really like Mykel Williams is I think he could end up as one of the premier run-stopping edge defenders in the NFL. His anchor is elite. He pretty much never gets put on the ground or even moved off of his spot. Watching him set the edge and stack and shed is just beautiful. Like, the snap behind his hands when he makes contact and the way that it just pierces through a blocker's chest and folds him backwards is incredible. He lands his punch with full extension, locks out his opponent, gets back into the play when it's time to shed. I just feel so confident in the floor that he gives you as an early down run defender. And, obviously pass rush is more valuable and that's still in development, but I don't think he's too far away, and he's still a really young player. He has, kind of an explanation for last year, which is that he was playing through an injury. I came into the year not really seeing the top 5 hype with Mykel Williams, but he's turned into, I think, a slightly underrated player. My number 2 edge rusher is Mike Green out of Marshall. And as you can see, it's extremely close grades between really edges 2 through 5. Grouping them into the same position almost doesn't make sense because they're going to be playing different roles, and teams are going to value them differently based on what they're looking for. But I think Mike Green is the second best pass rushing prospect in this class. Checks pretty much every box except size. He's explosive, flexible, technically advanced, has a lot of different moves. He can win with speed, win with power, has a full arsenal of counters to constantly remain in attack mode. He just poses a relentless, unpredictable threat to his opponent and applies pressure from every direction. His go-to fastball is a cross chop and ghost rip. He's also got a double swipe as kind of a change-up speed rush. He can hit you with speed for a few plays, get you to overset, then win with an inside counter, maybe throw in an inside spin, get you worrying about the B gap. Then the next play, he jab steps inside, gives you an outside spin and wins the corner. And then after that, he can go speed to power and put you in the quarterback's lap. I think he can improve his leg drive to sustain his bull rush after that initial surge. And sometimes the length shows up where he doesn't really have the reach to land a chop or a swipe. But other than that, I just think he's an incredibly complete pass rushing prospect. When you combine the athleticism, the natural feel for counters, the hand pop and the early knockback that he can generate as a power rusher, and then just the relentless motor and pursuit speed, it would shock me if he wasn't at least a high-end number 2 pass rusher. Now, the run defense is going to be limited by his anchor. He gets displaced, put on his back, washed out of gaps by combo blocks, but he does offset some of that by his stack and shed ability and the way that he just violently attacks blocks. Even though you might be able to get him on the ground once or twice a game, he's not going down without a fight, and you still got to be prepared to match his physicality. I think if you put Mike Green in a bigger frame, you might be looking at an elite run defending prospect. He can push pull, he can swim, knife through blocks, a lot of different ways to proactively and quickly defeat blocks. Just not somebody that's gonna, lock out, set a hard edge. But if anybody can make it as a run defender at his size, I think Mike Green can. That's why one of my comps is Nolan Smith. I think he's like Alex Highsmith as a pass rusher, and Nolan Smith as a run defender is kind of the best possible outcome for him. Another player that I gotta mention the off-field stuff. Again, doesn't affect my grade, but interviews will be crucial with him. And finally, my number one edge rusher is Abdul Carter out of Penn State. He's been my number one player overall for a while. The injury concerns did move him down to number 2 just because the gap between him and Travis Hunter was pretty small, but a true blue chip player that I think is one of the only first round players this year who would go in that same spot in like any other year. This being a weak class doesn't really apply to your team if you're able to get Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, because those are, true blue chip players that deserve to go in the top 5. He has elite explosiveness, bend, and quickness. For the player ratings, the only 99 rating that I gave for this entire edge class was Abdul Carter's explosiveness. The only 98 rating that I gave was for his quickness. Just launches out of his stance and reaches the corner sometimes before the tackle can even get into his set. He's extremely flexible to wrap the corner, finish his speed rushing moves, lethal when it comes to inside counters. He's just a blur crossing a blocker's face. His spin move was automatic. Nobody really besides Josh Connerly had a chance of mirroring it. What's maybe most impressive about Abdul Carter though is the level of technical polish that he showed in his first year as a full-time edge rusher. Like, he really doesn't need to add too many more moves. You don't see him miss with his hands very often. I think he takes good angles into his rush. His ability to immediately shift gears gives him the flexibility to throw in hesitations and stutters and slow play his pass rush, because he's got to get to the quarterback before he releases the ball, but he can get from point A to point B so quickly that he can afford to take an extra second to get into his move. I wish he used power more frequently last year. He didn't really need to deviate from speed rushes and inside counters. He could kind of just alternate between those two paths and win like every other rep. The few times he did use it were absolutely dominant, like flattened USC, Washington, and UCLA's tackles. Again, those were the 3 worst tackle duos in the Big Ten, so would have liked to see that against better competition, but he's explosive enough that I think he can win with power in the NFL. I see his range of outcomes as Nick Bonito to Micah Parsons, and which end of the spectrum he ends up as is going to be dependent on how consistent his speed to power ends up being. The thing that makes Micah Parsons such a unicorn is how dominant of a power rusher he is. I mean, one of the only NFL pass rushers that can say they got a speed to power sack on Lane Johnson. But yeah, it's obviously a lazy comp, but I don't think it's inaccurate. Now, I don't think Abdul Carter's run defense gets enough scrutiny. There's other players in this class that are constantly criticized for, what they're going to do on early downs in the NFL. Mike Green, James Pearce. I feel like they both had better tape in the run game than Abdul Carter did. Obviously, Mike Green, it's a massive gap in level of competition, but like Carter gets put on the ground by tight ends a decent amount. His contact balance and anchor are not good. Now, he's relentless in pursuit. He has a blazing chase down speed. Like, his range extends from sideline to sideline no matter where he's lined up pre-snap. He isn't lacking physicality at all. I don't think he's as physical and plays with as much of an edge as Mike Green, but he's willing to take on a puller, spill the run to the alley. I just think it's worth mentioning that this is a player who's going to be a pass rushing specialist in the NFL. There are some places that listed him at 260. He did not look like that on tape, and at the pro day, he weighed in at 250. It still wouldn't prevent me from taking him. I mean, going back to Micah Parsons, he's not a great run defender, and who cares? If you're a game-breaking pass rusher, which I think Abdul Carter can be, you'll live with some inconsistencies in the run game. That's going to do it for this video. I have been recording for 7 hours. No idea how long this video is going to be when I edit everything together, but definitely going to be a massive one. Make sure to leave a like and a comment to help the algorithm. Greatly appreciate that. Sorry for the wait between last video and this one. Ended up having to put my dog down, which if you have gone through that before, it's pretty sad. So I just wasn't in the mood to talk about the draft for a while, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.